Get a real job like your sister, Dad mocked. Mafia boss smirked. She just became my partner. The bass line at Club Veritas did not just vibrate through the floor. It seemed to replace the heartbeat of every person in the room. It was a Friday night in Brighton City, and the air inside the upscale venue was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, top-shelf scotch, and the electric hum of suppressed inhibitions. Harper Quinn stood behind the polished mahogany bar, her hands moving in a blur of motion that had become pure muscle memory. She grabbed a shaker, tossed in ice with a satisfying clatter, poured 2 ounces of gin, a splash of elderflower liqueur, and a twist of lemon, all while listening to a man in a $3,000 suit complain that his drink was taking too long. "One moment, please," Harper said, her voice pitching perfectly over the thumping music. She did not look up, her focus entirely on the pour. She capped the shaker and snapped it in a rhythm that matched the beat dropping from the DJ booth overhead. She strained the liquid into a chilled coupe glass and slid it across a coaster with a practiced smile. The man took the drink, muttered a half-hearted thanks, and vanished into the crushing crowd. Harper exhaled, blowing a stray lock of dark hair out of her eyes. Her feet throbbed in her boots, a dull ache that had started 3 hours ago and would likely last until she woke up tomorrow afternoon. She checked her phone during a 3-second lull. There was an email from a potential client, a small bakery looking for a logo redesign. Harper's eyes scanned the text, her mind instantly populating with color palettes and typography choices. She mentally adjusted the serif font she had been considering, thinking that a softer, rounded script would better suit their organic branding. "Harper, table 4 needs a round of shots and a bottle of Grey Goose. The bar manager." Leo shouted over the noise. He was a good guy, frantic but kind, and he looked like he was about 5 minutes away from a panic attack. "On it," Harper replied, shoving her phone back into her apron pocket. The design work would have to wait. The freelance hustle always had to wait for the job that actually paid the rent. The thought brought a sour taste to her mouth, bitterer than the lemon rind on the counter. It dragged her mind back to 6 hours ago, to the pristine, silent dining room of her parents' house in the suburbs. The weekly Quinn family dinner was a tradition that Harper dreaded with every fiber of her being. Yet she never missed it. Guilt was a powerful motivator. The memory played out in her head like a bad movie scene she could not pause. Her father, Richard, had been at the head of the table, carving a roast chicken with surgical precision. Her sister, Emily, sat to his right, looking effortless in her scrubs, having come straight from the hospital. So, the hospital is finally rolling out the new 401k matching program, Emily had said, taking a sip of water. "It is fantastic. If I put in 6%, they match fully. It is going to do wonders for my retirement projection." Richard had beamed. He looked at Emily as if she had just announced she had discovered a cure for the common cold. "That is excellent, Emily," Richard had said, his voice warm and full of pride. "Smart. You have to look ahead. You are building a future. That is what a stable career does for you. It takes care of you." Then, the warmth had evaporated as he turned his gaze toward Harper. "And how is the art thing going? Harper, still drawing pictures for pennies? It is graphic design." "Dad," Harper had said, stabbing a piece of broccoli with more force than necessary, "and I have a few leads. I am building a portfolio." "A portfolio does not pay for health insurance," Richard had countered, his tone dropping into that familiar, disappointed register. "You are 28 years old." "Harper, Emily is 29 and she has a retirement plan. You have a tip jar." "I am working," Harper had argued, her face heating up. "I pay my own bills. By mixing drinks for drunks until 3 in the morning." Richard had scoffed. "It is childish. It is irresponsible. When will you get a real job like your sister?" The question had hung over the table, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Emily had looked down at her plate, uncomfortable but silent. Harper had felt the familiar sting of humiliation prick at the corners of her eyes, but she was too tired to fight. She had just finished a double shift the day before and had another one looming. She had simply finished her dinner in silence, the food tasting like ash, back in the present. The subway ride to the club echoed in her mind. She remembered staring at her reflection in the darkened window of the train car, the graffiti of the tunnel blurring past. She felt stuck. She was caught in a suffocating limbo between the desperate need for money and the burning desire to prove she was more than just a pair of hands pouring alcohol. She resented the stability her father worshipped because it felt like a cage. But standing here, ankle deep in spilled ice and lime wedges, she had to admit the cage looked comfortable. The atmosphere in Club Veritas shifted suddenly. It was not a sound, but a feeling. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop, and the frantic energy of the dance floor cooled by several degrees. Harper looked up from the cash register, sensing the change. The heavy velvet ropes at the VIP entrance parted. Security guards, men who were usually relaxed and joking with the staff, suddenly straightened their spines, their eyes scanning the crowd with predatory focus. Adrian Costa had arrived. He moved through the club like he owned the very air people were breathing, which, considering he owned the building, the land, and likely half the city council, was not far from the truth. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him so perfectly it must have been tailored in Italy. His dark hair was swept back, his face sharp-angled and unreadable. Harper watched him from the safety of the bar. She had seen Adrian Costa before, of course. He came in occasionally to check on the business, but he usually stayed in the glass-walled office upstairs. Tonight, he was walking the floor. He moved with a calm lethargy that was more terrifying than aggression. People parted for him instinctively, like water flowing around a stone. He was flanked by 3 men, his inner circle, but Adrian was the center of gravity. Harper noticed something else. The security team was not just standing straighter, they were shifting positions. They were creating a perimeter. The vibe was tense, coiled tight. "Harper," Leo hissed, appearing at her elbow. "The boss is at table 1. He wants the signature cocktail. You make it best. Go." "Me?" Harper asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "Leo, I have a line 3 people deep. I will cover the line," Leo insisted, looking pale. "Just go. Do not make him wait." Harper sighed, grabbed a silver tray, and quickly assembled the drink, a smoked old-fashioned with a rare bourbon that cost more per ounce than her weekly grocery budget. She placed the crystal glass on the tray, checked the garnish, and walked out from behind the bar. Navigating the floor was a contact sport, but as she approached the VIP section, the crowd thinned, the air here was cooler, quieter. Adrian Costa was seated on a leather banquette, one arm draped along the back of the seat. He was listening to a man in a gray suit speak in low, hurried tones. When Harper approached, the conversation stopped instantly. Adrian turned his gaze to her. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and unnervingly direct. "Your drink, Mr. Costa," Harper said, her voice steady despite the sudden spike in her pulse. She set the drink down on the marble table. Beside it, she placed the new cocktail menu she had mocked up earlier that week. It was just a prototype, printed on heavy cardstock. She had sketched a small, intricate vine design in ink along the border of the specials list, a tiny flourish she had added during a slow moment, just to see how it looked. Adrian reached for the glass but paused. His hand hovered over the menu. "Did you do this?" he asked. His voice was deep, smooth and quiet, yet it cut through the ambient noise of the club effortlessly. Harper froze. She'd forgotten the sketch was there. "I apologize," she said quickly. "I was just testing a layout idea. I can bring a fresh one." "No," Adrian said. He picked up the card, studying the ink drawing with a critical eye. He looked up at her, tilting his head slightly. "It is good. Elegant. Most people clutter the negative space. You left it open." Harper blinked, surprised. "Thank you." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. Not as a waitress, but as a person. He took in the messy bun held up by a pencil, the intelligent eyes, the way she stood her ground instead of fidgeting. "What is your name?" he asked. "Harper," she answered. "Harper Quinn." Adrian took a slow sip of the bourbon, his eyes never leaving hers. "Well, Harper Quinn, the balance in this drink is excellent, and your line work is confident." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the main bar. It started as a shout, sharp and angry, rising above the music. Harper turned, her instincts from years of bartending kicking in. 3 men had pushed their way to the front of the bar. They were not dressed for Club Veritas. They wore heavy leather jackets and jeans, and they moved with a jagged, aggressive energy that screamed trouble. Harper recognized the look immediately. It was the Martez crew. They were a rival outfit, lower rent, messier, and trying to carve out territory in Brighton City. They had cornered Leo. One of the men, a guy with a scar running through his eyebrow, grabbed Leo by the collar of his shirt and yanked him forward over the bar top. "Where is my money, little man?" the thug shouted. Security started to move, but the crowd was thick, blocking their path. The thug shoved Leo back, and as he did, his jacket swung open. Harper saw the glint of metal, a gun, tucked into his waistband. The music was still pounding. The crowd had not fully realized what was happening yet, but the panic was starting to ripple outward from the bar like a shockwave. If that gun came out, people would scream. The stampede would be worse than the shooting. Harper looked at Adrian. He had seen it too. He was already rising, his face a mask of cold fury, his hand reaching inside his jacket. But he was too far away. If a firefight started now, amidst 300 civilians, it would be a massacre. Harper did not think. She just moved. She was closer to the DJ booth than the bar, but she knew the layout of the club better than anyone. She knew the emergency lighting panel was located on the wall just behind the VIP partition. She lunged for the panel. She slammed her hand onto the button marked Atmosphere Reset. It was a cue meant for the end of the night or a major beat drop. It cut the main house lights to near black, triggered the smoke machines to blast at full capacity, and activated the strobes. The club plunged into darkness. Hissing plumes of white smoke erupted from the ceiling vents, blinding and disorienting everyone. In the sudden confusion, the music cut out for a split second as the system reset. Harper grabbed a tray of empty champagne flutes from a nearby service stand and hurled it onto the tile floor as hard as she could. Crash! The sound of shattering glass was deafening in the sudden silence. "Oh my God!" Harper screamed, pitching her voice to sound like a terrified, clumsy waitress. "I'm so sorry. Watch out, glass everywhere." The distraction was absolute. The Martez thugs flinched, looking around wildly in the strobe-lit fog. Confused by the sudden sensory overload and the noise, they lost their focus on Leo. That split second was all Adrian's security team needed, emerging from the smoke like ghosts. 3 large men tackled the Martez crew. There was a brief, brutal scuffle, sounds of fists hitting meat, a grunt of pain, and then the thugs were hauled up and dragged toward the back exit, their feet barely touching the floor. The gun never made an appearance. The crowd, disoriented by the lights and the smoke, assumed the crash was just a dropped tray, a classic party foul. Harper stood by the wall, her chest heaving. She reached out and hit the normal preset on the lighting board. The warm amber lights flooded back on. The music swelled again. The smoke began to dissipate. Leo was shaking behind the bar, but he was safe. The customers were laughing, pointing at the broken glass, completely unaware they had just been seconds away from a gang shooting. Harper leaned back against the wall, her legs suddenly feeling like jelly. She pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to command her heart to slow down. From the VIP section, Adrian Costa was watching her. He had not moved to intervene once the lights went out. He had watched the entire sequence, the quick thinking, the manipulation of the environment, the fake accident. He saw the way she was trembling now, hiding her hands behind her apron as she walked back toward the bar, forcing a bright, fake laugh as she apologized to a customer for the clumsy spill. He saw the steel spine beneath the exhausted waitress demeanor. Harper grabbed a broom and began to sweep up the shards of glass. She focused on the broom bristles, refusing to look up, refusing to acknowledge the terror that was just now starting to catch up with her. She had just interfered in gang business. She had just saved the club. She might have just put a target on her back. The rest of the night passed in a blur. The adrenaline crash left her exhausted, her movements sluggish. When the house lights finally came up at 2 a.m, and the last stragglers were being ushered out the door, the floor manager, A stern woman named Karen approached Harper. "Mister, Costa wants to see you," Karen said. Harper's stomach dropped. "Am I fired?" Karen looked at her with a strange expression. "I doubt it. Come on, upstairs." Harper followed her up the steel staircase to the glass-walled office that overlooked the empty dance floor. The bass was gone, leaving a ringing silence in the large room. Karen knocked once and opened the door. "Go on in." Harper stepped inside. The office was soundproofed, silent as a tomb. It smelled of leather and that expensive, subtle cologne Adrian wore. He was sitting behind a massive desk made of reclaimed wood and glass. He was looking at a security monitor feed, rewinding a segment of video. Harper recognized the footage. It was her, hitting the light panel. "Sit down, Harper," Adrian said without looking up. She sat in one of the plush chairs opposite the desk. She clasped her hands in her lap to stop them from fidgeting. "Mr. Costa, about the tray." She started, her voice dry. "I can pay for the glasses." Adrian paused the video. He turned his chair slowly to face her. The intense, predatory look was gone, replaced by a calm curiosity. "You realize they were armed before my head of security did," Adrian said. "It wasn't a question. I saw the jacket move," Harper said, keeping her voice low. It was heavy on one side, and the way he stood, he was protecting his waist. "Observation," Adrian noted. "And the lights. If I screamed, people would have panicked," Harper explained, gaining a little more confidence. "If security rushed them in the open, the gun comes out. I needed to blind them. Confusion buys time." "Confusion buys time," Adrian repeated slowly. He leaned back, tenting his fingers. "That is a tactical assessment. Where did you learn that? The Army? Police Academy?" Harper let out a short, incredulous breath. "Catering, Mr. Costa. I managed a wedding once where the bride's ex-boyfriend showed up drunk with a baseball bat. You learn to de-escalate or distract before the cake gets ruined. It is just instinct." Adrian studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched, tense but respectful. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind, calculating variables that Harper couldn't see. "Most people freeze," he said finally. "Even people I pay to be dangerous. They hesitate. You did not. I just didn't want anyone to get hurt," Harper said. "You protected my customers," Adrian corrected. "And you protected my reputation. A shooting inside Club Veritas would have brought the police down on me for months. You saved me a significant amount of money and headache tonight." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the desk. "This is a bonus, for the glass, and for the quick thinking." Harper looked at the envelope. She needed the money. She needed it desperately. But something about taking it felt like crossing a line. "I was just doing my job," she said. "Your job is to pour gin," Adrian said. "What you did tonight was something else." He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Harper stood as well, her legs still feeling heavy. "Take the money, Harper," he said. "Consider it a consulting fee." She hesitated, then reached out and took the envelope. It felt heavy. "Thank you. Mr. Costa." Adrian walked around the desk and opened the door for her. As she stepped past him, she was acutely aware of how tall he was, of the physical power he held in check. "You mentioned you do design work," he said, his voice low. Harper paused in the doorway. "Yes, I am trying to build a branding business." Adrian nodded, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Someone who can think that fast under pressure is wasted pouring drinks," he said. "Keep your phone on. Harper, I might have a project that requires that specific set of instincts." He offered her a small, enigmatic smile. "Good night, Harper. Good night, Mr. Costa," she whispered. She walked down the stairs, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The envelope burned in her pocket. She felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had walked into the lion's den and walked out not just alive, but seen, for the first time in a long time. She didn't feel like a disappointment. She felt capable. And as she pushed open the heavy doors of the club and stepped out into the cool night air of Brighton City, she had the distinct, unsettling feeling that her life had just changed direction, whether she wanted it to or not. The sun was just beginning to bleed a pale, watery gray through the blinds of Harper Quinn's apartment when she finally unlocked her front door. It was 5 a.m. The adrenaline from the incident at Club Veritas had long since faded, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her limbs feel like they were filled with lead. Her feet throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the smell of stale gin and smoke clung to her hair. She dropped her keys on the small laminate counter of her kitchenette and opened her laptop, hoping to check for any invoices that needed sending before she collapsed into sleep. The screen flickered to life, the blue light harsh in the dim room. One new email sat at the top of her inbox. The subject line read, "Rebranding Concepts, Savory Bites Catering." Harper blinked, rubbing her eyes to clear the blur. She clicked it open. "Dear Harper, we've reviewed the sketches you sent over last week, and frankly, we're blown away. The logo concept with the intertwined fork and basil leaf is exactly the kind of organic elegance we were looking for. We don't just want the logo. We want to know if you can handle the full launch campaign for our new downtown location. We are talking menus, social media assets, and event signage. Let us know your rates for a comprehensive package." Harper read it twice, then a third time. A slow, tired smile spread across her face. This was it. This was not just $100 for a flyer. This was a campaign. This was a portfolio piece that could actually open doors. For a moment, the chaotic noise of the club and the terrifying face of the gunman faded, replaced by the clean, quiet satisfaction of being recognized for her actual talent. She closed the laptop, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Maybe she did not have to be a bartender forever. Maybe she was finally clawing her way out. That spark of hope lasted exactly 48 hours, until the Sunday family dinner. The Quinn dining room was suffocatingly warm, smelling of roasted pork and rosemary. Richard sat at the head of the table, pouring gravy with the solemnity of a judge passing a sentence. Emily was across from Harper, looking fresh and rested, talking about her weekend rotation. "I had a patient today who brought me flowers," Emily said, smiling as she cut her meat. "An elderly gentleman. He said the care plan I set up for his diabetes management saved his foot. It was really sweet." Richard beamed at her, his face crinkling with approval. "That is what it is all about," Richard said, pointing his fork at her. "Making a difference, having a profession where people respect you. You are doing good work. Emily, essential work." He turned his head toward Harper. The warmth in his eyes instantly cooled. "And how was your weekend? Harper, did you survive the nightlife?" Harper took a sip of water, steeling herself. She set the glass down carefully. "Actually, it was good. I got an email on Saturday morning from that catering company I told you about. They love the sketches. They want to hire me for their entire launch campaign." She waited for the praise. She waited for a nod, a smile, anything. Richard chewed his roast pork slowly. He swallowed and wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "How much are they paying?" he asked. Harper hesitated. "I haven't set the final quote yet, but for a project this size, it could be a few $1,000s. "A few thousand," Richard repeated, his tone flat. "And how long will that last you? 2 months, 3 in this city? It is a start." "Dad," Harper said, her grip tightening on her fork, "it is a real client. It is hobby money." "Harper," Richard said, dismissing it with a wave of his hand, "it is gig work. It is not a career. Look at your sister. She has a salary, she has benefits. She has a path. You are nearly 30 years old and you're getting excited about drawing menus for a catering company that probably won't exist in a year." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Emily looked down at her plate, her cheeks flushing pink. "Dad, don't," Emily murmured. "Harper is talented. Talent does not pay a mortgage," Richard snapped. "I'm just trying to be realistic. I worry about you. Harper, I do not want you waking up at 40 with nothing to show for your life but a stack of drawings and bad knees from standing behind a bar. When will you get a real job like your sister?" The humiliation was a physical blow. It struck Harper in the chest, hot and sharp. She looked at her father, seeing the genuine disappointment in his eyes, and something inside her finally snapped. The years of comparisons, the subtle digs, the refusal to see her work as valid, it all boiled over. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I am not Emily," Harper said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I am never going to be Emily. And I am done apologizing for it." "Harper, sit down," Richard commanded, his voice rising. "No," Harper said, "I am not hungry." She threw her napkin onto her plate and stormed out of the dining room. She grabbed her coat from the hallway and slammed the front door behind her, the vibration rattling the frame. She marched down the driveway, tears of anger stinging her eyes, desperate to be anywhere but there. The text message came the next day, while Harper was sitting in a park, staring blankly at a pond and trying to talk herself out of a depression. "Meet me at the Iron Press Cafe on 4th Street, 2 o'clock. We have business to discuss. A. Costa." Harper stared at the screen. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thump. She knew she should be wary. She'd seen the violence at the club, the way the security guards moved, the way the air changed when Adrian walked into a room. He was dangerous. There was no pretending otherwise. But then she heard her father's voice in her head. "Hobby money. When will you get a real job?" Curiosity, and a desperate need to prove that she was worth more than minimum wage, warred with her fear. She checked her bank account balance on her phone. It was pitifully low. She typed a quick message to Emily. Meeting a client for a potential big project. Might be late. It wasn't a lie, exactly. She stood up, brushed the grass from her jeans, and headed toward 4th Street. The Iron Press Cafe was trendy, industrial chic, and located in a quiet, upscale neighborhood far from the neon grit of the nightclub district. When Harper walked in, she spotted Adrian immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, his back to the wall, nursing an espresso. He was wearing a navy turtleneck and a blazer, looking more like a tech CEO than a crime boss, but the way his eyes tracked everyone who entered the door gave him away. Harper approached the table. He stood up as she arrived, a polite, old-world gesture that surprised her. "Harper," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Costa," Harper said, sitting down. She kept her bag on her lap, a subconscious barrier. "Please, call me Adrian. We are not at the club." He signaled a waiter, who appeared instantly to take Harper's order. Once she had a coffee in front of her, Adrian leaned back, studying her with that same intense, calculating gaze he had used in his office. "You look tired," he observed. "Family drama." Harper deflected, taking a sip of the hot coffee. "You said you had business to discuss? Direct." "I like that," Adrian said. He rested his elbows on the table. "I told you on Friday that you were wasted behind a bar. I meant it. I am expanding my interests. Harper, the Costa Syndicate, my family. We have done things a certain way for a long time, but the world is changing. I want to build something legitimate, something that stands in the light." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I am launching a new company. Veritas Urban Experiences. It will be a high-end events and branding firm. We will handle corporate parties, charity galas, restaurant launches, and exclusive private gatherings. I have the capital, the connections, and the venues. What I do not have is someone with the creative vision to make it look proper." Harper frowned, intrigued despite herself. "You want to hire me as a designer?" "No," Adrian said softly. "I want to hire you as a partner." Harper nearly choked on her coffee. "Partner? Creative director and minority partner," Adrian clarified. "You would receive a salary, of course, significantly higher than what you make at the club. Plus 15% of the net profits from every event we book. You would have full creative control over the brand, the events, the aesthetic." Harper set her cup down, her hand trembling slightly. She hid it under the table. 15%? "Mister." "Adrian, why? You could hire any agency in the city. Because agencies ask questions I do not want to answer," Adrian said, his voice dropping an octave. "And because agencies follow rules that do not always apply to my world, I need someone who understands the gray areas. Someone who can think on their feet when a problem walks through the door wearing a leather jacket and carrying a weapon. He looked at her meaningfully. This company will operate legally. Harper, the money will be clean, the taxes will be paid, but some of the clients, they will be complicated men. Complicated women. I need someone who can walk between those two worlds, someone who can make dangerous men look respectable and make nervous rich people feel safe. I saw you do exactly that on Friday night. Harper's mind was racing. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. It was the kind of role that people worked 20 years to get, but the shadow behind it was impossible to ignore. You are asking me to be the face of a mob front, she whispered. I am asking you to help me build a bridge out of that life, Adrian corrected. It is not a front, it is a transition, but yes, the roots are where they are. Suddenly, Adrian's gaze snapped to the front door of the cafe. 2 men had just walked in. They were wearing ill-fitting suits and had the weary, cynical look of city employees. Adrian did not move a muscle, but the air around him hardened. He shifted his chair imperceptibly, angling his body so his coat fell open, giving him easier access to whatever was holstered beneath his arm. Harper saw the change. She looked at the men, then back at Adrian. "Detectives?" she mouthed. Adrian gave a barely perceptible nod. "They like to remind me they are watching. Do not look at them, look at me." Harper forced her eyes back to Adrian's face. His jaw was tight, a muscle ticking near his ear. She realized in that moment that the danger wasn't just a concept. It was a physical weight that he carried everywhere. He was constantly hunted, and yet he was sitting here, trying to build a legitimate business, trying to create something that didn't involve looking over his shoulder. He was serious. He truly wanted this company to work. The detectives ordered coffee to go and stood by the counter, their eyes boring into the back of Adrian's head. After a tense 2 minutes, they left, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully. Adrian exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. "The contract," he said, sliding it across the table. Harper reached for it. As her fingers touched the paper, Adrian's hand was still there. Their fingers brushed. A jolt of electricity, sharp and undeniable, shot through Harper's arm. It wasn't fear this time. It was something else, a magnetic pull, a recognition of the intensity that simmered beneath his cool exterior. She looked up, and for a split second, Adrian's mask slipped. His eyes darkened, focusing on her mouth before snapping back to her eyes. "Read it," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Take your time, but I need an answer by tomorrow." Harper pulled her hand back, her skin tingling where he had touched her. "I will let you know," she said, her voice breathless. That evening, Harper sat on the floor of her living room, the contract spread out on the coffee table like a battle map. She had highlighted clauses, circled terms, and looked up words like limited liability and indemnification. She needed to talk to someone. She dialed Emily. "Hey, you okay?" Emily asked as soon as she picked up. Dad was Dad yesterday. I'm sorry." "I am fine," Harper said, curling her legs under her. "Em, I need to ask you something. I got a business offer. The catering thing? No, bigger. Much bigger." Harper picked at a loose thread on the rug. "It is a partnership, a new events company. I would be creative director. The money is incredible. Emily, it is more than Dad makes." "That is amazing," Emily cried. "So what is the catch?" "You sound like there is a catch. The backing partner is a little intense," Harper said carefully. "He's an investor with a lot of different business interests. Some of them are a bit rough. He wants me to run the clean side of things." Emily was silent for a moment. "Rough how? Like mean? Or like dangerous? Just complicated," Harper said. "But the contract is solid. I would have real power. I could finally stop scrambling for rent. I could build something that is mine." "Harper," Emily said gently, "you know you do not have to prove anything to Dad, right? You don't have to take a risk just to show him you have a real job. I am proud of you no matter what you do." "I know," Harper said, her throat tightening. "But I want this, Em. Not just for him, for me." I am tired of being on the outside looking in. I want to be the one making the decisions. Then be careful, Emily said. If it feels too good to be true, just keep your eyes open. But if you think you can handle it, then go for it. You are smarter than people give you credit for. Harper hung up, feeling a wave of gratitude for her sister. Emily was the only anchor she had. She spent the rest of the night pacing her small apartment. She looked at the peeling paint on the windowsill. She looked at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. She thought about Richard's sneer. Hobby money. Then she thought about Adrian. She thought about the way he had looked at her in the club, like she was an equal. She thought about the way he had positioned himself between her and the door when the detectives walked in. He was offering her a seat at the table. A dangerous table. Yes, but a seat nonetheless. She imagined walking into a ballroom she had designed, seeing the lights, the branding, the success. She imagined handing her father a business card that said partner. By 4 a.m, the decision was made. The next afternoon, Harper walked into Club Veritas. The club was closed, the cleaners moving silently through the shadows, vacuuming the carpets. She walked straight to the stairs and up to the office. The door was open. Adrian was waiting. He stood by the window, looking down at the street below. He turned as she entered. He didn't say anything, just watched her with that intense, gravity-well stillness. Harper walked to the desk. She didn't sit down. She pulled the contract out of her bag. It was signed. She placed it on the glass surface. "I have conditions," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "I am listening. I run the creative side completely. You do not veto my designs unless there is a security risk. And I want final say on vendors. I am not hiring someone's cousin just because he needs a job if he can't deliver quality work." Adrian's lips quirked into a ghost of a smile. "Agreed. And," Harper added, taking a breath, "my family is off limits. They never come here. They never know about your other interests. If this spills over onto them, I am out." Adrian's expression turned solemn. He walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. He was close enough that she could smell the crisp scent of his shirt and the underlying hint of danger that seemed to radiate from him. "Your family is safe. Harper, you have my word." He reached out and picked up the contract. He checked the signature at the bottom. The ink was still slightly fresh. He looked up at her, and the smile that broke across his face was slow, satisfied, and terrifyingly charming. It transformed his face, making him look younger, yet somehow even more formidable. He extended his hand. Harper took it. His grip was warm, firm, and calloused. The electricity was there again, stronger this time. A humming tension that traveled up her arm and settled low in her stomach. It was a handshake that felt like a vow. "Welcome, partner," Adrian said softly. Harper looked into his dark eyes and knew there was no turning back. She had just signed her name in blood. Metaphorically speaking, she was now part of his world, and God help her. She was ready for it. The new office of Veritas Urban Experiences smelled of fresh paint, expensive espresso, and the crisp scent of unboxed electronics. Located in a renovated industrial loft directly above Serafina, one of Adrian Costa's most legitimate and highly rated Italian restaurants, the space was a world away from the throbbing bass and sticky floors of Club Veritas. Here, the floors were polished concrete. The windows were floor-to-ceiling sheets of glass overlooking the Brighton city skyline, and the atmosphere was one of serious, high-stakes creativity. Harper Quinn stood before a massive whiteboard, a marker in one hand and a tablet in the other. She wore a tailored blazer over her jeans, a concession to her new title of creative director. Though her hair was still swept up in a messy bun secured by a paintbrush. "We need the lighting to feel architectural, not theatrical," Harper told her team. She gestured to the 3 young designers sitting around the conference table, eager. Talented graduates whom she had handpicked. "No strobes. I want warm amber uplighting against the industrial beams. We are selling sophistication, not a rave." The team nodded, scribbling notes furiously. for the first time in her life. Harper felt a surge of pure professional authority. These people didn't look at her like she was a waitress with a sketchbook. They looked at her like she was the boss. It had been 3 weeks since she signed the contract, and the pace had been relentless. Adrian had kept his word. He provided the capital, the office space, and the legal framework, but he left the creative execution entirely to her. Well, mostly entirely. The heavy steel door at the entrance clicked open. The chatter in the room instantly died down. Adrian Costa walked in. He was wearing a slate gray suit without a tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. He looked relaxed, but his presence sucked the air out of the room. He carried that same calm, predatory stillness that made people instinctively straighten their posture. "Do not mind me," Adrian said, his voice smooth and low. "Just checking the vendor contracts for the TechStream launch." He walked past the designers, who looked terrified to make eye contact, and came to stand directly behind Harper. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. She smelled his cologne, sandalwood, leather, and something sharp like cold winter air. Harper tried to focus on her diagram. "You checked the contracts yesterday, Adrian, and the day before. I am a micromanager when it comes to money," Adrian murmured, leaning in to look at the mood board she had pinned up. He wasn't looking at the numbers. He was looking at her sketches. His arm brushed against her shoulder as he pointed to a concept image of a floating centerpiece. "This is ambitious," he noted. "Can we suspend that much weight from the venue ceiling?" Harper forced her heart rate to slow down. "The venue is the old ironworks building. The trusses can hold 5 tons. I checked the engineering schematics this morning." Adrian turned his head slightly. His face was inches from hers. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "Thorough," he said softly. "I like that." He stayed for an hour, hovering in her orbit, making the air in the loft feel thick and charged. Every time he spoke, every time he moved into her personal space under the guise of reviewing a budget line, Harper felt a prickle of electricity run down her spine. It was distracting, it was infuriating, and God help her, it was the highlight of her day. The TechStream launch was their first true test. It was a massive contract, a software company debuting a new streaming platform, and they wanted to make a splash that would dominate social media for weeks. The pressure was immense. Harper worked 18-hour days, fueled by caffeine and the terrified determination not to fail. She negotiated with caterers, argued with fire marshals about occupancy limits, and sourced custom furniture from 3 different states. 3 nights before the event, Harper was alone in the office. It was 2 a.m. The city lights outside were a blur of rain-slicked neon. She was arguing with Adrian, who had come up from the restaurant below with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "We cannot cut the immersive entrance tunnel," Harper insisted, slamming her hand on her desk. "It is the hook. Adrian, it transitions the guests from the real world into the brand experience. If we cut it to save budget, it is just another party in a warehouse." Adrian stood on the other side of the desk, his expression unyielding. "It is a fire hazard. Harper, the fabric draping is too close to the heat lamps. If an inspector walks through, they shut us down. I'm not risking the permit for a hallway. We can use flame-retardant silk," Harper countered, her exhaustion fraying her temper. "I already sourced it. It costs 20% more, but it is safe." She stood up, leaning over the desk to glare at him. "You hired me for my vision. Trust my vision." Adrian stared at her, the silence stretched, heavy and taut as a wire. He walked around the desk. Harper held her ground, though her breath hitched in her throat. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of her, crowding her against the edge of the mahogany table. He looked down at her, his eyes searching her face. The anger in his expression shifted into something else, something darker, hotter, and far more dangerous than a permit violation. "You are stubborn," he said quietly. "I am right," she whispered. Adrian let out a short, rough breath. He stepped closer, his thigh brushing against hers. He reached out, his hand sliding across the desk to rest just inches from her own hand. The contrast of his large, scarred hand against the smooth wood was striking. "I know you are right," he admitted. "That is what makes you so frustrating." The air between them crackled. It was no longer about the drapes or the fire marshal. It was about the weeks of hovering, the lingering glances, the tension that had been building since that first night in the club. Adrian's gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. His pupils were blown wide. Harper felt her pulse hammering in her neck. She should step back. She should mention the contract. She should talk about professionalism. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. Adrian moved slowly, giving her every chance to push him away. He raised his hand, his fingers brushing the stray hair from her temple. His touch was incredibly gentle, at odds with the violence she knew he was capable of. His palm cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Harper leaned into his touch instinctively, her eyes fluttering shut. She felt his breath, warm and scented with red wine, fan against her skin. "Harper," he murmured, his voice a vibration she felt in her chest. He leaned in and kissed her. It was slow at first, a testing of waters, his lips firm and warm against hers. Harper let out a shaky exhale, her hands gripping the edge of the desk to steady herself. But then Adrian groaned low in his throat, and the kiss deepened. Shifting from tentative to urgent, his hand slid from her face to the small of her back, his fingers spreading wide to pull her flush against him. The contact was electric. Harper gasped against his mouth, her resolve crumbling. She let go of the desk and reached up, her fingers curling into the crisp cotton of his shirt, pulling him closer. He tasted of wine and power. His other hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. Harper pressed her body against his chest, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath the suit, the rapid thud of his heart matching her own. For a moment, the world narrowed down to just this: the heat of his mouth, the strength of his arms, and the overwhelming, terrifying realization that she had wanted this for a long time. They broke apart, breathless, chests heaving. Harper's lips were swollen, her eyes wide. She stared at him, her mind reeling. Adrian looked just as shaken. His hair was mussed where she had gripped it, his usually stoic face flushed with desire. Harper took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. We can't," she stammered, her voice trembling. "The partnership, the business, we have to keep this professional." Adrian watched her, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He didn't move to touch her again, but he didn't back away either. He ran a hand over his face, composing himself. "Professional," he repeated, his voice rough. "Right." He looked at her, and for a second the mask dropped completely. He looked raw. "I will approve the extra budget for the silk," he said. He walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. He didn't look back at her as he spoke. "I will keep it professional, Harper, but do not expect me to apologize. I am not good at pretending I do not want something once I see it." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Harper alone in the silent office, her lips still tingling and her heart beating so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. The TechStream launch was a triumph. The immersive tunnel, draped in flame-retardant silver silk and lit with pulsating blue LEDs, was the most photographed feature of the night. 300 guests, including the city's top tech moguls and socialites, filled the venue. Harper moved through the crowd in a simple, elegant black dress, a headset hidden in her ear. She directed the catering staff, cued the lighting transitions, and charmed the client with a confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Social media was buzzing. The hashtag Veritas launch was trending locally. From the VIP balcony, Adrian watched her. He held a glass of champagne he hadn't touched. He watched the way she commanded the room, the way she smiled at the CEO of TechStream, the way she handled a minor crisis with a spilled tray without breaking her stride. She was brilliant, and she was his partner. The pride he felt was a fierce, possessive thing in his chest. But in Adrian's world, success always drew wolves. The come-down was brutal. 2 days after the launch, Harper received a call from their wholesale florist, a sweet older man named Mr. Russo, who had operated out of a warehouse in the district for 40 years. His voice on the phone was thick and weeping. Harper drove to the warehouse immediately. When she arrived, the smell of crushed lilies and bleach hit her. The warehouse had been tossed. Vases were shattered. Thousands of dollars of exotic blooms trampled into a pulp on the concrete floor. But it was the blood stain on the floor near the register that made Harper's stomach turn over. Mr. Russo was sitting on a crate, holding an ice pack to a face that was swollen purple and blue. His arm was in a sling. "They said I was doing business with the wrong people, Mr." Russo whispered, refusing to look Harper in the eye. "They said the Costa money is dirty. They said next time." They burned the place down. Harper stood amidst the wreckage of the flowers, her heels crunching on broken glass. She felt a cold, sick sensation wash over her. This wasn't a business dispute. This was the Martez crew sending a message. They were hurting innocent people just to get to Adrian, just to get to her company. She walked outside, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't get her car keys into the ignition. She sat in the driver's seat and stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked the same, but she felt different. The glamour of the launch party felt a million miles away. This was the reality. This was the cost. That Sunday, Harper went to the family dinner. She needed normalcy. She needed to feel like Harper Quinn, the daughter. Not Harper Quinn, the partner of a crime boss. It was a mistake. The tension in her parents' dining room was palpable. Richard was in a foul mood, complaining about the property taxes and the neighbors. When the plates were cleared, Harper took a deep breath. She wanted to share her success. She wanted them to know she was doing well. "I finished my first big project this week," she said quietly. The TechStream launch, it was a huge success. We came in under budget and the client signed a retainer for 3 more events. Emily smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "That is amazing! Harper, I saw the photos online. It looked incredible." Richard poured himself more wine, not looking at her. "And who is we?" Richard asked. "This partner of yours?" "Yes," Harper said. "Veritas Urban Experiences. I own 15% of the company." "Dad?" Richard let out a short, derisive laugh. 15% of a party planning business. He scoffed. "It is not just party planning," Harper said, her voice tightening. "It is brand management. It is logistics. It is a real company. It is playing house." Richard sneered. He slammed his glass down. "You are nearly 30. Harper, when are you going to stop this nonsense? Get a real job like your sister. Playing party planner won't pay the bills forever. And who is this partner? Some other dreamer with no credit score?" Harper's face burned. The injustice of it choked her. She was making more money in a month than she used to make in a year. She was building something massive. "He is an investor," Harper said through gritted teeth. "He believes in me, which is more than I can say for you." Emily tried to intervene. "Dad, stop it. She's doing great. She's deluding herself." Richard shouted. The doorbell rang. The sound cut through the argument like a knife. "I will get it," Harper muttered. Standing up, she needed a moment to breathe before she started screaming. She walked to the front door and pulled it open. Adrian stood on the porch. Harper froze. He was dressed in a dark suit, his overcoat collar turned up against the wind. Behind him, parked at the curb, was his black SUV with the engine running. "Adrian," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" "You weren't answering your phone," Adrian said, his eyes scanning her face, noting the distress. "We have a meeting with the venue owner for the charity gala in 20 minutes. You forgot." "Oh, God," Harper stammered. "I completely forgot. Who is it?" Richard's voice boomed from the dining room. He walked into the hallway, followed by Emily. Richard stopped dead when he saw Adrian. Adrian Costa was an imposing figure in any setting, but in the domestic hallway of the Quinn family home, he looked like a wolf standing in a sheep pen. He radiated power and wealth, but also a dangerous edge that made the hair on the back of one's neck stand up. "I am here to pick up Harper," Adrian said smoothly. Richard narrowed his eyes. He looked from Adrian's expensive suit to the black car outside, then back to Harper. "So this is the partner," Richard said, his lip curling. "You look like a man who knows how to waste money. What is it? A midlife crisis investment?" "Dad!" Harper cried, mortified. Richard ignored her. He stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Listen here. My daughter might be foolish enough to get involved in your little party planning schemes, but do not think for a second I approve. She needs a real career, not whatever this charade is." Harper opened her mouth to defend him, to defend herself. But Adrian spoke first. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He simply hardened his expression, his eyes turning to cold flint. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. "With respect, Mr. Quinn," Adrian said, his voice deliberately calm and cutting. He looked at Harper, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second before snapping back to Richard. "She's not my employee, and she is not playing games. She just became my partner." The word partner hung in the air, heavy and loaded with double meaning. It wasn't just a business title. The way he said it, possessive, final, and absolute, made it clear to everyone in the room that he was staking a claim. Richard was stunned into silence. He blinked, unsure how to respond to the quiet menace in Adrian's tone. Adrian offered his arm to Harper. "We are late, Harper." Harper looked at her father, who was pale and silent. She looked at Emily, whose eyes were wide with shock. Then she looked at Adrian. She stepped out onto the porch and took his arm. As they walked down the path to the idling car, Harper's heart was pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew, with terrifying clarity, that everything had just changed. Her two worlds had collided, and there was no going back. The silence in the car ride away from the Quinn family home had been heavy, but the explosion that followed the next morning was deafening. Harper had returned to her parents' house solely to retrieve her car, hoping to slip in and out unnoticed. Instead, she found Richard waiting in the driveway, his face a mask of sleepless fury. The shouting match that ensued was not the passive-aggressive dinner table banter Harper was used to. It was a brawl. "You are running with criminals." "Harper," Richard shouted, his voice echoing off the suburban siding. "Do you think I am blind? That man is not a businessman. He is a thug in a tailored suit. And you are letting him use you. I am a partner." "Dad," Harper yelled back, her hands shaking as she gripped her car keys, "I own a stake in the company. I am running the entire creative division. Why is it so impossible for you to believe that I could actually succeed at something?" "Because you are naive," Richard countered, stepping closer. "You have always been the dreamer, the one with the sketch pad and the head in the clouds. You have no idea what kind of world you are walking into. You think you can handle difficult things? You have never handled a real crisis in your life." The words struck a nerve so deep it vibrated in her bones. Harper stared at him, her eyes stinging. "I handle difficult things every day," she said, her voice dropping to a low, trembling register. "I just don't do it the way you want me to. I don't do it like Emily. And for the first time in my life, I don't care if you think that makes me weak. I am done asking for your permission to be successful." She got into her car and slammed the door, reversing out of the driveway without looking back. She watched her father shrink in the rearview mirror, a small, angry figure standing on the perfectly manicured lawn. But the liberation she expected to feel was choked by a knot of dread in her stomach. Harper threw herself into her work with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. If her father thought she was running a sham operation, she would prove him wrong. She would build something so undeniable, so legitimate, that even he would have to acknowledge it. Her target was the Brighton Children's Hospital Gala. It was the most prestigious charity event of the season, and Veritas Urban Experiences had bid aggressively to manage it. Harper designed a concept that was pure magic, a winter garden theme inside the grand ballroom, complete with living ice sculptures and a ceiling projection of the Aurora Borealis. She told herself it was just business, but deep down, she knew it was a shield. If she could tie Adrian's name to the city's most beloved charity, it would wash away the stain of the rumors. It would make them untouchable. But the shadows were growing longer. 2 weeks into the planning, the phone rang at 3 a.m. It was Adrian's head of security. "There has been an incident at the bistro on 5th, the voice said. Harper drove there in her pajamas, throwing a trench coat over her clothes. When she arrived, the street was bathed in the flashing blue and red lights of police cruisers. The entire front window of the restaurant, one of Adrian's flagship legitimate businesses, was shattered. Glass littered the sidewalk like diamonds. It was a drive-by, a warning. Harper ducked under the police tape, her heart hammering. She found the manager shaking in the corner, but her eyes were drawn to the perimeter. 3 men in dark jackets stood near the alleyway. They were not police. She saw the bulge of shoulder holsters beneath their coats. Adrian's men. Armed. Her stomach twisted. This was not a branding exercise. This was war. She spent the next 4 hours coordinating board-up crews and reassuring the terrified staff, using her calmest professional voice while her hands trembled in her pockets. She was sweeping up shards of glass when she realized that this was exactly what Adrian had warned her about. The gray zone was fading. The black and white reality of violence was bleeding through. The escalation continued, quiet but relentless, until the night the war came to her doorstep. Harper was working late at the loft office, finalizing the seating chart for the gala. The building was empty, the silence amplified by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic. The elevator chimed. Harper looked up, expecting the cleaning crew. Adrian stumbled out. He was alone, which was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. He was wearing a white dress shirt, but the left side was soaked in a dark, spreading crimson stain. "Adrian," Harper gasped, knocking her chair over as she scrambled up. She ran to him just as his knees buckled. She caught him, his weight heavy and solid against her, and guided him toward the leather sofa in the lounge area. "I am fine," Adrian gritted out, his face pale and slick with sweat. "It is just a graze. You are bleeding through your shirt," Harper snapped, terror making her voice sharp. "Sit down. Do not move." She ran to the kitchenette and grabbed the first aid kit and a stack of clean towels. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the roll of gauze twice before she managed to grip it. When she returned, Adrian had leaned his head back against the cushions, his eyes closed. He looked exhausted, the lines of his face etched deep with pain. Harper fell to her knees beside him. She reached for the buttons of his shirt. "I need to see it," she said. Adrian hissed through his teeth as she peeled the fabric away from his skin. The wound was a jagged tear along his ribs. It was deep and ugly, oozing blood. But he was right. It hadn't hit an organ. It was a flesh wound, likely from a bullet that had scraped past him. "Who did this?" Harper whispered, pressing a towel firmly against his side. "Ambush," Adrian murmured, his eyes opening to watch her, leaving a sit-down. They missed. Mostly. Harper applied pressure, watching his muscles tense under her hands. The blood was warm and sticky on her fingers. The metallic smell of it filled the small space, mixing with the scent of his cologne. "This is insane," Harper said, her voice cracking. "You could have been killed. Adrian, you walk around like you are invincible, but you are just a man." Adrian watched her. He saw the tears welling in her eyes, the fear that made her pupils dilate. He reached out with his uninjured arm, his fingers brushing her cheek. He traced the path of a tear that had escaped. "Harper," he said softly. His voice was rough with pain. "You do not have to do this. You can walk away. The contract. I will tear it up. If this life scares you, leave. Go back to the safety." Harper looked at him. She looked at the blood on her hands, the dark intent in his eyes. She thought about her father's safety, her quiet apartment, the boring stability she had run from. Then she looked at the man bleeding on her couch because he was trying to build something better. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered. She leaned forward, needing to be closer to him, needing to prove that the fear wasn't enough to drive her away. She rested her forehead against his, exhaling a shaky breath that mingled with his. Adrian's hand slipped from her cheek to her waist. His grip was strong, pulling her into the V of his legs. The proximity was overwhelming. The adrenaline of the danger mixed with the simmering attraction that had been building for weeks. Harper shifted, careful of his side, and their lips met. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It was acclaiming. Adrian kissed her like he had almost lost the chance to do it ever again. His mouth was hot and demanding, his breath uneven. Harper made a small sound in her throat, her body pressing carefully against his uninjured side. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palm, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. For a moment, there was no gala, no Martez crew, no angry father. There was just the heat of his skin, the taste of him, and the terrifying realization that she was in love with a man who might not survive the year. They broke apart, gasping for air. Adrian's eyes were dark, burning with a hunger that had nothing to do with business. Harper pulled back slightly, her hands resting on his chest. "We need to stop the bleeding," she said, her voice trembling. Adrian nodded slowly, though his gaze dropped to her lips one last time. "You are right." Harper stood up, her legs unsteady. "I am calling a doctor. Not the hospital. I know someone. Emily has a friend who does private consults. He's discreet." She walked to her desk to make the call, forcing herself to switch back into crisis management mode, but her skin still burned where he had touched her. The secrecy didn't last. 2 days later, Richard Quinn sat in his living room staring at the television. The local news was running a segment on the upcoming Children's Hospital Gala. The reporter stood in front of the venue. Questions are swirling tonight regarding the involvement of Veritas Urban Experiences, a new player in the city's event scene. Sources allege the company has ties to the Costa Syndicate, raising concerns about the influence of organized crime on Brighton City's most cherished charity. The screen cut to B-roll footage taken outside the Planning Commission office. It showed Harper. She was walking next to Adrian, holding a binder. Adrian was leaning in to say something to her, and even through the grainy footage, the intimacy and partnership were undeniable. Richard stood up, his face purple with rage. He grabbed the phone. He called Harper 5 times before she picked up. "Quit," he demanded. "Quit immediately." "Dad, I can't talk right now," Harper said. "I saw the news." "Harper," Richard shouted. "Everyone saw it. You are dragging our name through the mud. You are standing next to a mob boss on the 6 o'clock news. I am meeting you," Harper said, cutting him off. "The diner on 4th? In 20 minutes. We are finishing this." The diner was a neutral ground, smelling of grease and old coffee. Harper sat in a booth, her hands clasped on the table. When Richard walked in, he didn't even sit down. "You are done," he said. "I will not have my daughter laundering a criminal's reputation." "I am building a legitimate business," Harper said, her voice steady despite the shaking in her chest. "We are helping the hospital. Dad, we are raising millions of dollars." "Blood money," Richard hissed. "It is blood money. Harper, and if you stay with him, that blood is on your hands." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "I will not watch you destroy yourself. If you do not walk away from this, from him, then you are not welcome in my house. You are not part of this family. I will cut you off. Harper, completely." Harper looked at her father. She saw the fear behind the anger, but she also saw the stubborn, blinding prejudice that had made him dismiss her art, her dreams, and her worth for her entire life. She thought about Adrian. She thought about the way he looked at her, with respect, with need, with partnership. She thought about the man who had taken a bullet and offered her an out. "I'm finally building something real." "Dad," Harper said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "For the first time in my life, I am important. I am capable. And if you can't see that, if you can't see me, then that is your loss." Richard stared at her. He waited for her to crack. He waited for her to apologize. When she didn't, he straightened up. "Get a real job, Harper," he spat, "or do not come home." He turned and stormed out of the diner, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully. Harper sat alone in the booth. She covered her face with her hands and wept, silently and brokenly, while the waitress pretended not to notice. She left the diner an hour later, feeling hollowed out. The sun had set, and the streetlights were flickering on. She walked to her car, parked in the shadowed lot behind the building. She was reaching for her door handle when she stopped. There was something on her windshield. Under the wiper blade, someone had wedged a bouquet of flowers. But they were dead. The roses were brown and withered, their heads drooping like hanged men. nestled in the center of the dead flowers, glinting in the harsh light of the street lamp, was a single brass bullet casing. Harper stared at it, the breath freezing in her lungs. It wasn't just a threat. It was a message. We know where you are. We know who you love. She looked around the dark parking lot. A black sedan was idling at the far end, its headlights off. As soon as she looked at it, the engine revved, and the car peeled away into the night. Harper grabbed the door handle, her fingers slipping on the metal. She scrambled inside and locked the doors, her heart slamming against her ribs. She dialed Adrian's number before the key was even in the ignition. They weren't just attacking the business anymore. The weak spots were in play. And Harper realized with a terrifying jolt that the weak spot wasn't just her. It was Emily. It was Richard. The war had followed her home. Harper threw the wilted bouquet onto Adrian's desk, the dead petals scattered across the polished glass surface like dried blood. Next to them, the brass bullet casing hit with a heavy, hollow clatter that echoed in the silent office. Adrian looked at the objects, then up at Harper. His face, usually a mask of unshakable calm, went rigid. The color drained from his skin, leaving his eyes burning with a sudden, terrifying darkness. "They were on my car," Harper said, her voice shaking with a fury that barely masked the terror clawing at her throat. "Outside the diner. They followed me. Adrian, they know where I was. They know where I parked." Adrian stood up slowly. He did not touch the bullet casing. He did not have to. He knew exactly what it meant. He walked around the desk, his movements predatory and precise. He reached for his phone, dialing a number without looking at the screen. "Double the detail on Harper," he said into the receiver, his voice deadly quiet. "And put a round-the-clock shadow on her father's house. If anyone gets within 500 feet of the Quinn residence, I want to know about it. If they sneeze in that direction, I want to know." He hung up and looked at Harper. "I am sorry," he said. "Sorry?" Harper let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. She paced the length of the office, hugging her arms around herself. "You promised me my family was off limits. You said the gray zone would not touch them. I will fix it," Adrian said. He stepped toward her, but Harper took a step back. "You cannot fix this with money or guards," Harper cried. "Do you know what it feels like to look over your shoulder every time you walk to your car? To wonder if the car behind you is just a commuter or a hitman? You have lived like this forever. I have not. I will not let them touch you," Adrian said. He closed the distance between them, ignoring her retreat this time. He gripped her shoulders, his hands firm and grounding. "Look at me." Harper looked up. His eyes were fierce, desperate. "I will burn the city to the ground before I let anything happen to you or your family," he vowed. "You are going to have protection. 2 men, visible at all times. I do not want bodyguards," Harper argued, though the fight was leaving her as the reality of his warmth seeped into her cold skin. "I do not want to live in a cage." "It is not a cage," Adrian said, his voice softening. "It is a shield. Please. Harper, let me do this. I need to know you are safe so I can end this." Harper looked at the bullet casing on the desk. She hated the feeling of being watched, of losing her freedom. But she thought of Richard standing on his lawn, angry and vulnerable. She thought of Emily walking to her car after a night shift. "Fine," she whispered, "but only until the gala is over. Until it is over." Adrian promised. The reality of the threat hit home for Emily Quinn 3 nights later. She was working a graveyard shift in the emergency room at Brighton General. It was a chaotic night, filled with the usual stream of minor accidents and fevers, until the paramedics wheeled in a man with severe trauma, male, mid-30s, blunt force trauma to the head and defensive wounds on the forearms, the paramedic recited as they rushed the gurney into Trauma Room 2. He was found in an alleyway off 4th Street. No wallet, no ID. Emily snapped on her gloves and moved to the patient's side. He was conscious but dazed, his face swollen. As she cut away his shirt to check for chest injuries, her eyes snagged on a tattoo on his upper arm. It was a stylized lion, inked in black and gray. She froze. She had seen that tattoo before, weeks ago. She had dropped off a forgotten sketchbook at Harper's new office. She had passed a man in the hallway, one of the security guards Harper had introduced as staff. He had been rolling up his sleeves, and she had seen that exact lion. This was not a random mugging victim. This was one of Adrian Costa's men. Emily treated his wounds with professional efficiency, stitching the laceration on his arm and ordering a CT scan. But her mind was racing. When the man was stabilized and sedated, she went to the break room and called Harper. "Harper," Emily said, her voice low and urgent. "You need to tell me the truth, all of it." Harper, exhausted and guarded, tried to deflect. "Emily, I am working." "Do not lie to me, Harper," Emily cut in. "I have a patient in bed 4 with a lion tattoo. He works for your partner. He was beaten half to death in an alley tonight. Is this what you are involved in?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Harper let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Can you meet me?" Harper asked. "Please." They met an hour later in Harper's apartment. Harper told her everything. She told her about the Martez crew, the threats, the bullet on the car, and the war that was brewing over the legitimacy of the company. Emily sat on the sofa, her face pale. She was terrified. She was a nurse. She spent her life fixing the damage that violence caused. But as she listened to Harper, she didn't see a naive little sister playing gangster. She saw a woman who was terrified but standing her ground. "He's trying to go straight." "Em," Harper said, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "The gala, it is the key. If the gala succeeds, we get the contracts with the city. We get the corporate accounts. He can leave the other stuff behind." Emily looked at Harper. She saw the fear, but she also saw the determination. And beneath that, she saw how much Harper cared for him. "Okay," Emily said. "Okay?" Harper blinked. "If we are doing this, we are doing it right," Emily said. She pulled a notepad from her purse. "What are you doing?" "I'm looking for patterns," Emily said, her voice shifting into her clinical, problem-solving tone. "The man I treated tonight?" He kept muttering something before the sedative kicked in. He said, "The north entrance." Harper frowned. "The north entrance of what? The hospital?" Emily said, "The service entrance." Harper's eyes widened. She grabbed her laptop and pulled up the schematics for the gala venue, the hospital's new atrium wing. The Martez crew wasn't just attacking random guys in alleys. They were probing. They were testing defenses. They are going to hit the gala, Harper realized, a cold chill washing over her. They want to humiliate Adrian in front of the entire city. And they want to hurt people, Emily added grimly, if they cause a panic in a hospital. "Harper, we have to stop them." The next evening, the atmosphere in Adrian's penthouse was thick with tension. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, floating high above the city. Harper stood at the head of a massive dining table, which was covered in blueprints, guest lists, and security rosters. Adrian sat at the other end, watching her. Around the table sat 3 of his lieutenants, hard-faced men who looked at Harper with a mixture of skepticism and thinly veiled annoyance. They were used to taking orders from Adrian, not a party planner. The Martez crew is predictable. One of the lieutenants, a man named Silas, said, He tossed a file onto the table. "They will hit the perimeter. We put men outside. We show force." "Wrong," Harper said. Silas narrowed his eyes. "Excuse me. They won't hit the perimeter because they know you expect that," Harper said, her voice steady. She pointed to the map. "This is a charity gala. There will be press. There will be donors. If they start a shootout on the street, the police response time will be under 2 minutes. They want chaos, not a standoff." She tapped the blueprint. "They will come in here." She said, "The catering load-in zone. That is a secure entrance." Silas argued. "It is secure for staff," Harper corrected. But between 7 and 8 o'clock, there are 6 different vendors arriving, florists, caterers, sound technicians. It is a bottleneck. All they need is one uniform and a fake invoice, and they are inside the building before your men at the front door even know something is wrong. The room went silent. Silas looked at the map, then at Harper. He frowned, realizing she was right. Adrian leaned forward. "So, what is the play?" he asked. "We split the load in," Harper said. "A hard assets come in at 4 o'clock. Food comes in at 6. We lock down the service entrance completely by 6:30, and we put your undercover guys here, here and here." She pointed to the blind spots she had identified, the kitchen corridor, the coat check, and the balcony overhang. "If they get in, they will try to trigger the fire alarms to clear the room," she explained. "That creates a stampede. We need men at the alarm panels." Adrian looked at the map. He looked at the strategic choke points she had identified. It was brilliant. It was the kind of logistical mastery that came from managing hundreds of drunk wedding guests, applied to urban warfare. "Do it," Adrian said to Silas, exactly as she said. Silas nodded slowly. He looked at Harper, and for the first time, there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. Understood. The lieutenants gathered their files and filed out, leaving the heavy silence of the penthouse behind them. Harper exhaled, her shoulders slumping as the adrenaline faded. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering grid of Brighton City. Adrian walked up behind her. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a warm weight at her back. "You were incredible," he said softly. "I was terrified," Harper admitted, watching her reflection in the glass. "I am planning a battle. Adrian, I am supposed to be planning centerpieces. You are planning a defense," Adrian corrected. "You are saving lives." He stepped closer. "My men, they respect strength," he said, "but they respect intelligence more. You have both." Harper turned to face him. The city lights cast a halo around his silhouette, leaving his face in shadow. He looked tired. The strain of the war, the wound in his side, the constant vigilance, it was wearing him down. She realized then that he was just as scared as she was, not for himself, but for her. "You are the only one," he confessed, his voice rough. "What? You are the only person outside of my blood who can actually shake me," he whispered. "When I saw that bullet on your car, Harper, I felt something break inside me. I have never been afraid of losing anything before, because I never had anything I couldn't replace." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. "I cannot replace you." The confession hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Harper felt her heart twist. The fear of the threats, the anger at her father, the stress of the business, it all seemed to dissolve under the intensity of his gaze. She reached up and took his hand, pressing her cheek into his palm. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered. Adrian let out a ragged breath. He stepped in, his other arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him. It was not like the kiss in the office. Fueled by adrenaline and panic, this was slow. It was deliberate. Harper reached for his tie, loosening the knot with trembling fingers. She slid her hands up his chest, feeling the solid beat of his heart through the fabric of his shirt. Her fingers brushed the sensitive skin of his throat, and she felt him shiver. Adrian cupped her face in both hands, tilting her head back. He looked at her as if he wanted to memorize every line, every eyelash. Then he kissed her. It was deep and consuming. Harper melted into him, her body aligning with his as if they were two pieces of the same puzzle finally clicking into place. She felt the tension in his shoulders release, the rigid control he maintained every second of the day finally snapping. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. His arm tightened around her waist, possessive and steady, anchoring her. Harper pressed closer, savoring the warmth, the scent of him, the overwhelming sense of security that existed right here, in the eye of the storm. For tonight, there were no gunmen, no rival crews, no judgment. There was only this. The scene faded with them wrapped in each other's arms, the city lights bearing silent witness to a bond that had become the most dangerous and most important thing in both of their lives. The morning brought the cold light of reality. They sat at the kitchen island, drinking coffee and finalizing the plan. The intimacy of the night before had shifted into a seamless partnership. They moved around each other with a new ease, a silent understanding. "The Martez crew will try something," Adrian said, reviewing the security roster. We have to assume they will breach at least one layer. We manage the crowd, Harper said, circling a section of the ballroom layout. I have arranged the seating so the VIPs are near the east exit. If something happens, the band plays a specific transition song. That is the code for security to initiate an evacuation without causing a panic. Adrian nodded. Smart. One more thing, Harper said, hesitating. I am inviting my father. Adrian looked up, his cup pausing halfway to his mouth. Harper, is that wise? No, Harper admitted. But it is necessary. If this goes well, if he sees what we are actually doing, maybe he will understand. Maybe he will see that I am not just a victim here. Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. If he comes, I will make sure he is treated like a king. For you. The meeting with Richard was less civilized. Harper stood on the doorstep of her childhood home, holding the heavy, cream-colored invitation. Richard stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his face like granite. I do not want it, he said. It is for the hospital. Dad, Harper said, keeping her voice calm. It is for the children, and it is the biggest night of my career. Your career as a gangster's mall. Richard spat. Richard! Emily's voice cut through the air. Emily appeared behind him, wearing her scrubs. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were fierce. Take the invitation, Dad. I will not support this, Richard said, turning to Emily. You are going to support your daughter, Emily said, stepping between them. Harper has worked herself into the ground for this. She has built something incredible. And if you are too stubborn to see it, then you are going to lose her. For real this time. Richard looked at Emily, shocked by her tone. He looked back at Harper. He saw the fatigue in her eyes, but also the strength. She wasn't begging. She was offering. Just to see, Emily pressed, just for 1 hour. If you hate it, we leave, but you owe her the chance to show you the truth. Richard stared at the invitation in Harper's hand. He grunted, snatching it from her. 1 hour, he muttered, and I am driving myself. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit back room of a pool hall on the south side, the Martez crew was finalizing their own plans. Maps of the hospital atrium were spread out on a felt table. A man with a scar running through his eyebrow traced the line of the service entrance. The partner is the key, the man said. His voice a low growl. Costa is protecting her. He is distracted. We hit the event, another man asked. We hit the reputation, the scarred man corrected. We make it bleed. And while he is busy trying to save his precious charity, we take out the girl's family. He tapped a photo on the table. It was a picture of Richard Quinn. Break the partner, break the boss. The night of the gala arrived in a wash of velvet and diamonds. The Brighton Hospital atrium had been transformed. Harper's vision of a winter garden was breathtaking. Massive pillars were wrapped in white silk and birch branches, soft. Cool lighting bathed the room in an ethereal glow. A string quartet played on a raised platform, the music weaving through the chatter of the city's elite. Harper moved through the crowd like a shadow. She wore a floor-length tailored black dress that was severe and elegant, with a slit that allowed her to move quickly. A discreet earpiece was tucked into her hair. South sector clear. A voice crackled in her ear. Copy, Harper whispered. Keep eyes on the kitchen door. She scanned the room. She saw the mayor shaking hands with the hospital director. She saw Emily, looking lovely in a blue dress, guiding a stiff and uncomfortable Richard toward a table near the back. And she saw Adrian. He was standing near the main stage, speaking with a donor. He looked devastating in a tuxedo, but his eyes were constantly moving. He tracked Harper across the room, his gaze touching her like a physical caress every time their eyes met. He never let her out of his sight for more than 30 seconds. It was going perfectly, too perfectly. The music swelled. The string quartet transitioned into a waltz. The chatter grew louder. Harper checked her watch. 8:15. The speeches were starting in 5 minutes. She moved toward the service entrance to check on the catering team. As she neared the swinging doors, a waiter passed her, carrying a tray of champagne. He kept his head down. Harper paused. There was something wrong. The waiter's jacket was ill-fitting, and on his neck, Just peeking out above the collar was a glimpse of ink. It wasn't a lion, it was a scorpion. The symbol of the Martez crew. Harper's blood ran cold. She reached for her earpiece, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Security," she hissed. "We have a breach. East sector, the waiter with the—" Before she could finish, the waiter looked up. He saw her looking at him. He didn't panic. He smiled, and then he reached under the silver tray. The smile on the waiter's face did not reach his eyes. It was a cold, predatory expression that sent a jolt of ice through Harper's veins. Before she could scream a warning, he reached under the silver tray, his hand grasping something dark and metallic. At that exact moment, the attack began. It did not start with a bang, but with a flicker. The amber house lights, which Harper had so carefully calibrated to flatter the donors and the decor, suddenly strobed violently. Then, a sharp, piercing electronic shriek erupted from the ceiling. The fire alarm. Confusion rippled through the ballroom like a wave. The string quartet faltered, their bows screeching to a halt. Guests looked around, murmuring, clutching their champagne flutes. Harper pressed her hand to her earpiece, trying to hear over the rising din of the alarm. "Kitchen fire." A security voice crackled, sounding staticky and panicked. "We have smoke in the north corridor." "Negative." Another voice cut in, sharp and urgent. "No smoke. It is a manual pull." "False alarm. We have movement at the east service door." Harper's mind raced. It was exactly what she had predicted, a coordinated distraction. The flickering lights and the alarm were designed to break the security patterns, to force Adrian's men to look inward at the guests while the real threat slipped in through the cracks. From her vantage point on the mezzanine balcony, Harper looked down. The crowd was shifting, a nervous herd animal looking for an exit. Then she saw them. The service door near the buffet tables swung open. 3 men in catering uniforms slipped inside. They were not carrying trays. They were moving with a tight, tactical precision that screamed danger. One of them reached under his jacket. Harper's gaze swept the room, searching desperately for her family. She spotted table 4. Emily was standing up, looking toward the kitchen. Richard was still seated, looking annoyed rather than afraid, completely unaware of the peril moving toward him. The lead intruder was heading straight for their table. Harper's heart lurched into her throat. She could not freeze. If she froze, her father died. She ducked behind a marble pillar, shielding herself from the view of the floor, and keyed her radio. "All units." "This is Quinn," she said, forcing her voice to be steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The fire alarm is a decoy. We have 3 hostiles moving from the east service door toward the VIP sector. Do not engage in the open. I repeat, do not engage in the open. You will hit civilians." She took a deep breath and looked at the PA system control panel mounted on the wall next to her. She had installed it for speeches, but now it was a lifeline. She hit the override button, cutting the fire alarm audio. The screeching silence was jarring. She leaned into the microphone, pitching her voice to sound calm, professional, and utterly unbothered. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice booming smoothly over the speakers, "we apologize for the technical malfunction with the alarm system. Please remain calm. As part of our scheduled program transition, we invite everyone to move toward the West Garden for the dessert presentation. Please, follow the staff to the West Garden immediately for champagne and truffles." It was a lie, but it was a brilliant one. The promise of safety and sweets broke the panic. The crowd began to flow away from the east side, away from the intruders, creating a natural barrier of distance. Down on the floor, Adrian heard her voice. He looked up at the balcony for a split second, his eyes fierce with pride, before he turned his attention to the threat. He saw the men moving against the tide of the crowd. He signaled to his closest lieutenant. "Silas, cut them off," Adrian commanded low in his throat. "Keep it quiet." Adrian moved through the chaos like a shark in dark water. He intercepted the first intruder near the mahogany bar, grabbing the man's wrist before he could draw his weapon and slamming him face first into the counter with a brutal, efficient crunch. "Security, get this trash out of here," Adrian barked. But the other 2 men had veered off. They were heading for the back hallway, the escape route Harper had designed for the VIPs, and that was where Richard was. Richard, confused by the sudden movement and the lack of dessert, had stood up to look for Harper. He had wandered away from Emily, stumbling toward the rear corridor where he thought the offices were. "Dad, no!" Harper screamed from the balcony, dropping the microphone. She abandoned her post, hiking up her dress and sprinting down the service stairs. She took the steps 2 at a time, her heels clacking like gunfire on the metal treads. She burst into the back hallway just as the confrontation escalated. It was a narrow service corridor lined with stacking chairs and linen carts. Adrian was there, his gun drawn now, leveled at the 2 remaining intruders. His face was a mask of cold, lethal intent. "Drop it," Adrian snarled. "You have nowhere to go. The police are already on the perimeter." The lead gunman, the man with the scar Harper had seen in the parking lot, sneered. He looked trapped. He looked desperate. And then he saw Richard. Richard had just turned the corner, blinking in the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. He stopped, staring at the guns, at Adrian, at the men. "What is going on?" Richard asked, his voice trembling. The gunman lunged. He grabbed Richard by the collar of his tuxedo and spun him around, jamming the barrel of a pistol into the older man's temple. Richard gasped, his face draining of color as he was used as a human shield. "Back off," the gunman shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Back off, Costa, or I paint the wall with him." Adrian froze. His weapon was steady, aimed right at the gunman's eye, but he could not take the shot. The risk was too high. If he missed by an inch, if the bullet passed through, if the gunman reflexively pulled the trigger, Harper's father would be dead. Harper skidded to a halt at the end of the hallway. She saw her father's terrified eyes. She saw the gun pressed against his gray hair. "No!" she cried out, her voice breaking. "Please!" The gunman's eyes darted to her. "The partner," he hissed. "Good. Now we have the whole set. Drop the gun, Costa. Kick it over, or the old man dies." Adrian looked at Harper. He saw the sheer terror in her face. He saw the silent plea. Save him. He looked back at the gunman. He slowly, deliberately lowered his weapon. "Adrian, do not!" Silas shouted from behind him. "Quiet," Adrian commanded. He locked eyes with the gunman. He took a step forward, his hands open, palms showing. "Let him go," Adrian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "He is a civilian. He is nobody. You want to hurt me? You want to hurt my business? I am right here." He took another step. "Trade," Adrian offered. "Me for him. You take me hostage. You walk out the back door. You hurt him. And every cop in the city opens fire on you in 10 seconds. The gunman hesitated. The offer was tempting. Costa was the prize. "Dad, get down," Harper whispered, her body coiled to spring. Adrian continued to move forward, closing the distance inch by inch. He was stalling. He knew Emily had made the call 20 minutes ago. He could hear the faint wail of sirens growing louder outside the service bay doors. "I am walking toward you," Adrian said softly. "Let the old man go." The gunman shifted his grip, greedy for the bigger target. He shoved Richard forward, aiming the gun at Adrian instead. "Run, Richard!" Adrian roared. Richard stumbled, falling to his knees and scrambling toward Harper. Harper grabbed him, pulling him behind a linen cart, shielding his body with hers. The moment the hostage was clear, the hallway erupted. "Police! Drop the weapon!" The service doors at the end of the hall burst open. SWAT officers poured in, their tactical lights blinding. The gunman panicked. He fired wildly. One shot went wide, hitting a fire extinguisher in a cloud of white powder. The second shot found a target. Adrian jerked back, his body twisting as the bullet tore through the fabric of his suit jacket. "No!" Harper screamed. Adrian didn't fall. He stayed on his feet, firing once. The gunman dropped, clutching his leg, screaming in pain. The second intruder threw his weapon down, raising his hands in surrender as the police swarmed them. "Secure!" the lead officer shouted. "Suspects down." The chaos ended as abruptly as it had begun. The hallway was filled with the crackle of radios and the smell of gunpowder. Harper scrambled up from the floor, ignoring her father's grip on her arm. She ran to Adrian. He was leaning against the wall, clutching his upper arm. Blood was seeping between his fingers, dark and alarming against the crisp white of his shirt. "Adrian," Harper sobbed, reaching him. She pressed her hands over his, adding pressure to the wound. "You are shot. Oh, God, you are shot. It is fine," Adrian gritted out, his face pale but his eyes locked on hers. He winced, then managed a weak, reassuring smile. "Just the arm. I told you. I would protect him." Harper looked at the blood on her hands, his blood, shed for her father. Tears streaked down her cheeks, hot and fast. "You idiot," she whispered fiercely, pressing her forehead against his chest. "You brave, stupid idiot." The scene outside the hospital an hour later was a circus of flashing lights and news vans. The gala had been evacuated safely, the guests shaken but unharmed, unaware of just how close the violence had come. Inside the emergency bay, things were quieter. Richard sat on a plastic chair in the waiting area. He was still wearing his tuxedo, though the tie was undone and the knees were stained with dust from the hallway floor. He held a cup of lukewarm water in shaking hands. He was watching through the glass partition of the treatment room inside. Emily was finishing bandaging Adrian's arm. She worked with quick, professional movements, checking the stitching. But it was not Emily that Richard was looking at. It was Harper. Harper stood by the head of the bed. She had not left Adrian's side. She was holding his uninjured hand, her fingers interlaced with his. She was murmuring something to him, brushing the hair back from his damp forehead. Her posture was not that of a frightened child. It was the posture of a protector. She stood tall, her eyes alert, guarding him just as fiercely as he had guarded her. Richard watched them. He replayed the scene in the hallway over and over in his mind, the way Adrian had stepped in front of the gun, the way he had offered his own life to save a man who had done nothing but insult him, and he saw the way Harper had taken charge. The voice on the loudspeaker, the way she had shielded him behind the cart. He had called her work fake. He had called her weak, he realized now, with a heavy, humbling shame, that he had been the blind one. The door to the treatment room opened. Harper stepped out, looking exhausted but relieved. She saw her father sitting there. "Dad," she said softly, "are you okay?" Richard stood up slowly. He set the water cup down. "I am fine," he said, his voice rough. Thanks to him. He looked through the glass at Adrian, who was sitting up now, buttoning a fresh shirt that Silas had brought him. "I was wrong. Harper," Richard said. He didn't look at her. He looked at his hands. "I didn't understand. I still don't understand his world. It is dangerous. It is violent, but tonight." He looked up, meeting his daughter's eyes. "Tonight, your not real job saved 300 people, and your partner saved my life." Harper felt a lump form in her throat. "Dad." Richard took a deep breath. He walked over to her and awkwardly, stiffly, pulled her into a hug. It was the first time he had hugged her like that in years. "You are tough, Harper," he whispered into her hair. "You are just like your sister, maybe tougher." Harper squeezed him back, tears pricking her eyes again. Adrian emerged from the room, his arm in a black sling. He stopped when he saw Richard. The two men looked at each other. The air was still tense, but the hostility was gone, replaced by a grudging, heavy respect. "Mr. Quinn," Adrian said, nodding his head once. "Mr. Costa," Richard replied. "Thank you." They walked out of the hospital entrance together into the cool night air. Immediately, the press swarm descended. Microphones were thrust in their faces. "Mr. Costa, was this a gang war? Is the hospital safe? Mr. Costa, who is the woman? Is she your girlfriend? Is she involved in the syndicate?" Adrian stopped. He shielded Harper from the glare of the camera lights with his good arm. He looked directly into the lens of the lead camera, his expression steely and defiant. He squeezed Harper's hand, pulling her slightly forward so she stood beside him, not behind him. "Whatever you write, get this part right," Adrian said, his voice carrying over the noise of the reporters. He looked down at Harper, and for a moment, the cameras didn't exist. There was only the pride and the love shining in his dark eyes. "She is my partner." The word hung in the air, weighted with everything they had survived. It meant business. It meant equal. It meant love. Harper looked up at him, her heart swelling until she thought it might burst. She smiled, a radiant, genuine smile that the cameras captured perfectly. She squeezed his hand back. Epilogue 6 months later. The ribbon was red, wide, and satin. It stretched across the entrance of the newly renovated Brighton Community Arts Center, a sleek, modern building of glass and brick that had once been a derelict warehouse. The autumn sun was shining. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. There were city council members, hospital donors, and local artists. Harper Quinn stood at the microphone. She wore a cream-colored suit that screamed executive competence. She looked out at the crowd, her portfolio of sketches now a reality of brick and mortar behind her. "This center is a promise," Harper said, her voice clear and confident, a promise that art and business can build a community together. "We are grateful to the hospital board for their partnership, and to everyone who believed in this vision." She glanced to the side of the stage. Emily was there, wearing her lab coat. Having run over from the clinic on her lunch break, she gave Harper a double thumbs up, grinning, and next to Emily stood Richard. He was holding a program. When Harper caught his eye, he straightened his tie and pointed to the text on the front page where it listed the founders. He turned to the woman standing next to him, a neighbor from the suburbs, and pointed again. "That is my daughter," Richard said, his voice carrying just enough for Harper to hear, "the partner." Harper smiled, her throat tight with happiness. She stepped back from the microphone as the applause started. She reached for the oversized scissors to cut the ribbon. But she paused. She turned to the man standing in the shadows of the podium. Adrian stepped forward into the light. He looked different now. The tension that used to carry him was eased. The gray zone was still there. It always would be, but the balance had shifted. The legitimate side of the ledger was heavier now. He placed his hand gently on the small of her back, a familiar, grounding touch. "Together?" he murmured. Harper nodded. "Always." They placed their hands on the scissors together. With a sharp snip, the red ribbon fell away, fluttering to the ground like a petal. The doors opened. The crowd cheered. Adrian leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Nice job, partner." Harper leaned back against him, looking at the future they had built out of chaos. It wasn't safe, it wasn't simple, but it was theirs. "It is a real job," she whispered back, smiling, "and it was the best one in the world. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Harper and Adrian as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you're listening from today. Please drop a comment below and say hello. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of danger, passion, and redemption. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending in the comments. Did Richard redeem himself? Are you Team Adrian? Let me know in English. Until next time, keep reading.